So how do we leverage the Redux library to handle our state? Well, first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to grab the Redux library, which I'm going to do here. And again, I'm just working in my CDN here, and I'm going to bring in the Redux library. And I'm just going to, let's just do a console log when our app starts. So when this page loads, let's open up our code here. And we've got the Redux library. And really the only thing we're going to need right now with the Redux library, we're going to modify this, and it's actually going to simplify things a little bit. Because the Redux library is made for specifically managing state. It's an event emitter library for managing state. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a Redux store. And my store is going to be Redux. I want to create a store. And all Redux needs to have is a function, which is a reducer. And the requirements of that reducer are that it has to get some initial state. Now, right now, all I have in my application is an array of items. So I'm going to give my initial state an empty array. Sometimes you'll see people using objects and giving an item in that object an array, but this is really simplistic enough that I don't have to do that. And what I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to end up writing my reducer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a switch for the action.type. So the only way that a Redux store gets changed is they don't have a publish method, they have a dispatch method. And I'm going to ask the case, hey, look, was your action.type set items? If it was, I'm going to operate under the assumption that my new state is going to be the action.items, and I'm going to break. Okay? And there's two other scenarios. Is the case create item? And if the case is create item, then what I'm going to do is my state is going to be whatever it was before. I'm going to splat it out, and I'm going to add this action.item, which I'm adding. And again, I'm going to end up breaking. And if the case was destroy item, then my state is just going to be whatever it was before, and I'm going to filter it. And I'm just going to say, hey, look, I want to filter the item. And as long as your ID is not equal to the action item ID, I still want you. And then I'm just going to make sure that I return the state. So it's going to have all this subscription and all this other stuff here right off the bat. And how can I end up now getting this to work? Well, first of all, life's going to be a little bit easier here because I'm going to tell my store to get its state. My store is my Redux store. I'm going to go through these one at a time. And when I go to subscribe, here, just making this even a little bit easier, whenever this ends up changing, I'm going to tell my store get state. My store is actually simpler because my store is just really an array of items. Right, everything else really remains the same for the nav. And I'll do the same thing over here. So it's going to be my store get state is going to end up being my items. And here, actually, this becomes a little bit easier here because when I click here, I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. My life becomes a little bit easier. And in fact, one thing we could do here, this component becomes a little bit easier because what we could end up doing is we could tell our store dispatch. So Redux has this idea of dispatching. And we dispatch with a type, which is in this action. And our type is going to be, here we're going to be create item. And the new item, we'll say, is going to have an ID of math.random and a value of math.random. And since we are doing that, let's just see that we're calling the dispatch method here. We're dispatching, and let's just make sure that we have this right. Yeah, here's the, I got this a little bit wrong, I apologize. So here, this is going to be the item that we're adding. And again, this is probably nested a little bit too deeply. This is now the thing that we're dispatching, this whole object that has the item. And now we're closing this off over here. The thing that becomes interesting about this is that really what this allows us to do is to really make this really doesn't have to be all that fancy a component, right? I mean, we're not displaying the number of items. We just have our store to end up dispatching. So it makes our life a little bit easier, and frankly, we could actually just turn this into a regular component. We can't do that here with the items. With the items, again, we're going to use our store get state. And again, this is as simple a store as we could possibly come up with. When we end up going to destroy an item here, we don't have to worry about doing the filtering. What we can end up doing is we could tell our store, we want to dispatch to you. And what do we want to dispatch? Our type is going to be destroy item. And the item that we're going to destroy is this item. So every time we dispatch, we end up sending an object which has a type and some other data. And again, when we subscribe here, just our life becomes a little bit easier. So with Redux Store, you actually don't get the state over here. When you subscribe, we're going to tell our store to end up getting its current state because that's what your items are going to be. Let's make sure we just ended up doing that the right way up here as well. So here on our page here, again, this we don't get this value from the Redux Store, so I'm going to take that out. And let's see where this ends up getting us. Okay, it's a lot of code here. Let's just fix this. I might have some other error messages here too, but I see this is definitely going to be one of them. So store.publish, that's true. So it's not store.publish. We're going to end up going over here, and we're going to say store.dispatch. And the type is going to be set items. Again, this is what you would call after you ended up getting the data from an Axios request, and we could dispatch to our store. And so here we see the two items. If we go to home, we can add items. We can end up removing items. And what did this really buy us? Well, again, it's just basically an event emitter that is there for the job. It's an event emitter whose job it is to basically subscribe and to publish, so we don't have to use our code to do this. We can use the Redux Store. And our Redux Store really is nothing more than an array of items, which is really what our other store was as well. And there's three ways that this store ends up changing, with a type of set items, create items, and destroy items. And probably the last change we could end up making here is that this home can actually become just a regular presentational component. If I get my arrow right here. Instead of being a class, which if you can do that, you're always better off. And again, how do we know? Because we're not seeing anything about state here. The home component is not utilizing the store, so it doesn't have to subscribe to it. It's utilizing the store in terms of dispatching, but that's fine. And let's just figure this one out real quick. So they're getting me, I knew there was another one here with this extra one here. And while we're doing this, again, making sure that you're indented correctly is always going to end up helping. And I think I'm just forgetting here that home is equal to a presentational component. Again, we're not passing anything to it. We just need to be able to dispatch to the store from it. And that's really how we could go from looking at an event emitter, looking at the need for Redux, and actually adding Redux to our application.